Welcome back to Mean Streets, where each week we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And today's case is 1971's Get Carter, starring Michael Caine, and directed and written by Mike Hodges. The logline for Get Carter is when his brother dies under mysterious circumstances in a car accident, London gangster Jack Carter travels to Newcastle to investigate. Very excited about this episode. We have a guest with us today. We have the guy who wrote the book on Get Carter called Getting Carter, Nick Triplo. Nick, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Good to be here.
Welcome, Nick.
Nick, you literally wrote the book on Get Carter. So it's the title is Getting Carter, Ted Lewis and the Birth of Brit Noir. So it's, in terms of having a guest who, knows a little thing or two about this movie and this book, I think you're the perfect fit for it. So tell us a little bit about your history with Get Carter, your interest in the book, your interest in Ted Lewis, your interest in the movie and, in general film noir and Brit Noir. Like, put it all together.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a novelist first and foremost who sort of fell into writing non-fiction and sort of came across this incredible story about this guy who'd written the novel that Get Carter was based on, who was, when I started doing the research in sort of 2007, he was completely forgotten. He was completely marginalised and outside of a very, very few kind of crime noir aficionados. Nobody knew who he was, and I sort of spoke to somebody at my local library, and I discovered that he'd lived here in Barton upon Humber and had spent most of his life here, and in fact had gone to London and come back. But I discovered that there was a point at which the library was reviewing all their books, and the senior librarian said, well, we don't want to keep those books. No one's going to read them. And so they had all Lewis's original books, and there was something about that kind of railed me a bit. I just thought, this is an important guy, and it kind of falls into that category of we really don't appreciate our noir writers in this country, not in the same way they do in France, not in the same way they do in the States. And it felt like, look, there's a story here. And the minute I kind of started talking to people about Lewis, the whole Get Carter world seemed to open up. And he did a lot more besides that. He was a musician. He was animation cleanup supervisor on the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. He wrote Z-Cars episodes. He did the backgrounds for the Lone Ranger cartoon. He wrote a never-used series of scripts for Doctor Who that were commissioned. So he lived in a very short life. He died when he was 42. This incredible life. So in researching his biography, his life and his work, there is clearly a key element in the middle of it, and it was Get Carter. Obviously, this film that, 50 odd years on, is still probably one of the greatest British crime films ever made. And so I started doing that research. Well, I spent 10 years writing and researching what started off as a kind of side project of a fiction turned into this incredible journey of discovery and trying to verify things. He lived a completely chaotic life, but it took me into this world of Get Carter. Now, I knew the book. I'd studied the book from the perspective of a social realist text when I did my degree years ago. And I went back and revisited the film, and my view of it is that it's the first genuinely successful coming together of hard-boiled American-style fiction and British social realism in a kind of noir context. So as a writer, as a reader, it fascinated me that where had this guy come from, and how did this film get made, and what were those influences that fed into it. So that's really my interest. I hope that's not gone on too long.
No, that's really interesting. I'm shocked that the library was like, we're going to toss all these books. That to me is bonkers, right? Like, why would you do that? That's nuts. But I didn't realize that Ted Lewis wrote for Doctor Who or Or, I mean, I was sort of expecting when I was doing my research, I was expecting to see like Mike Hodges is maybe having done some work on Doctor Who. So it's interesting that Ted Lewis was the one who actually did some work for that. And what, the background's to Lone Ranger? What?
Yeah, the 1960s cartoons. They come out of art school. But he was part of that. Born in 1940, so he's part of that generation that kind of went, had that opportunity, the first opportunity to do like higher education, and to go to art school in Hull, and they went to London. He worked in advertising for a bit, and then he was always desperate to get into film. That was his whole kind of like drive from the age of about 8 years old, was film. He loved film, he loved cinema, and that was his route in, was this, using his art skills as an artist and a graphic designer to sort of develop these backgrounds. And if you look at those old Lone Ranger cartoons, what they did that was unique at that time was they used kind of cut up paper to kind of create these backgrounds. And if you look at them, there's this real kind of gothic steampunk kind of vibe to them. It's kind of, there is a noir element in there.
Interesting. I'm interested in your guys' experience of watching Get Carter now. So without spoilers or going into great detail, because we'll go into details, we talk about the film in general, but I'm interested, we'll start with you, Nick. What was your initial thought, if you can remember, like the first time you watched Get Carter, what was that initial experience like, and what impact did the film have on you?
I mean, it's hard to remember because it was a very long time ago. It must have been in the 1980s, and I would imagine it would have been on video or something. But it was bleak. It wasn't like anything else I'd ever seen. It certainly wasn't like anything else I'd ever seen Michael Caine in. And, I must have been like in my early 20s. It was like, oh, so you can do that with a film. You can do that like in this country with a film. And I guess, on future watching, strikes you is how European it is. It's got that aesthetic. And that's kind of what I was picking up on the first time I saw it, was this doesn't look like anything else I've seen. And oh my God, he dies at the end.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Spoilers all around. We will definitely be spoiling this film.
But that's a significant thing, because it's one of those things that kind of diverts from the book slightly, which we'll come on to, I'm sure. Yeah.
I kind of pick up on a lot of the same stuff that you did. The bleakness was very interesting to me. It's a very gritty looking movie. I was thinking about other films at the time, like James Bond movies, other British settings, and there's definitely a lack of polish to this that I love. I think that's really, really, but yeah, bleak and gritty come to mind when I first watched this, and I was really quite taken just with the atmosphere of the movie. The visuals of the movie were just really, for me, just really, really gripping, and I loved watching the movie. Matt?
Yeah, a bit like Nick. It's a long time ago since I saw this for the first time. It must have been maybe mid-90s that I saw this for the first time, when I'd already started to get into film noir about a decade before, but it was very much rooted in the Chandler and the Hammer adaptations and films like that, films that we've covered on this podcast, all those Hollywood studio things from the 40s and the 50s. And I didn't really know much about neo-noir. I'd seen Chinatown, obviously, but neo-noir wasn't a thing for me. And I can't remember why I latched onto this film, but I remember buying it from HMV in Manchester, which shows how long ago it was, on probably, I don't know if it was video or DVD, I really can't remember. And like both of you said, seen something that I'd never seen before, seen something that hadn't quite come onto my consciousness, really. Very, very documentary style. That's what I like about it. That's that sense of the 70s being captured on film. And we talk very much about crime writing being, if you want to know what life was like at the time of a certain period in time, read the crime fiction of that era. And I very much get that sense and that that feeling from Get Carter. I think this is a snapshot of what it was like in Newcastle in the 70s. It's not noir in the sense of how it's shot. It's noir in what it's dealing with and what it's saying, because it's shot like a British documentary. And it's all the better for it for me. It adds that extra layer of realism, which a film like this needs, I think.
Hodges and I believe the cinematographer, Wolfgang Szczycki, or as close as I'm going to get to pronouncing his name. I'm sorry, Wolfgang. We'll call him Wolfie. So yeah, both Mike and Wolfgang both had documentary backgrounds, and I agree with you. It definitely has that vibe. It was literally reminding me of BBC documentaries as I was watching this, with just the way, like that way it's looked, the way it's framed, the sort of, grittiness. I remember like watching like you watch old interviews from the 60s, 70s or whatever, and for some reason, what comes to my mind is there's this one, I don't know, it was on the BBC at some point, some guy climbing up Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square. And it has that same sort of visual quality of like dirty camera, not really great quality. And I think the way that they capture Newcastle with that sort of style, it makes it feel very real. In a sense, it gives it a sense of you are looking at real places. It doesn't have that Hollywood sheen that I think is one of the big reasons why this film is so captivating.
First time I met Mike Hodges, which was 2013, and he came up to Hull for a screening and a kind of an in-conversation thing that we did. Really, most of what we spoke about was his documentary work in the 60s, and what I kind of realised in talking to was how important that was in informing his worldview. And he wasn't just a documentary maker, he was a documentary maker on World in Action, which was about as cutting edge a kind of format as there was at that time. And it was on ITV, so it was like an independent. It didn't have the BBC's constraints, and it was telling stories that Mike was clearly passionate about. And I think what he learned from that was to not get in the way of the story. And so he was using long lenses. He was trying to make it look as though, and this is what he took into to Get Carter, was he wanted to make it look like it was action being observed rather than staged. And I think that's what comes across. And in terms of sort of similar stuff at the same time, and when you think that Kane had just come off the Italian Job, which is kind of a real glossy kind of caper, but at the same time, Ken Loach was making Kess, and I know which one Get Carter is closer to in terms of the way it looks. It's more like a Loach social realist film.
It's nuts to me that the production of this movie began and finished within 10 months.
Yeah.
I mean, that is bonkers to me. So the other thing I quite like, kind of in relation to that, is this is Mike Hodges' baby from start to finish, because not only did he direct it, but he also wrote it, and that adds another interesting aspect to the story, because he mentions that he was influenced by Chandler's writing and Hollywood B movies, and that idea of how the crime novel or the crime story is sort of a way of observing societal problems, and in I think fusing that with his documentary stance, I think he captures all of that really, really well here. But you do get a sense, we've seen other movies, like, we talked about The Big Sleep, and there's, we were discussing which of the three writers maybe wrote one of those scenes. With this, you really get the sense of this is a coherent vision of one individual, putting this idea forward. Yeah, there's lots of people who helped make this vision come to life, but you really get a sense that this is a really focused vision of an individual. I think. Did you guys get that feeling with this movie?
To a point. And this is where my kind of spent 10 years in walking in Ted Lewis's footsteps comes into it a certain extent. There are scenes in the film that are lifted directly from Lewis's source novel, as in word for word, beat for beat. And I think if you're going to write a script and shoot in 10 months, then there are kind of shortcuts. And this is something that Mike acknowledged later, which was Lewis wasn't credited enough as a co-writer. The line in the film is based on the novel Jack's Return Home by Ted Lewis. But I think his influence, not in the political aspect of it, that's pure Mike Hodges, that's Mike's drive. But in terms of the social realism of it, the basis of that, there are certain scenes, the card scene where they're playing cards, that's Lewis, that's complete Lewis. And I've kind of done a sort of close textual reading of both side by side. And it's interesting to look at where the kind of dialogue, particularly, Mike's just gone, thank you, I'll have that. But I don't need that, I don't want that. So yes, it's Mike's vision. It's a singular vision. It's, it's obviously kind of era defining, and it's career defining for pretty much everybody involved, actually. But I think Lewis's part shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. I mean, I guess, we with similar films like the Big Sleep or others that have been adapted, we do like to mention who the source material comes from. And obviously, yeah, you can't have this movie without Ted Lewis. And I don't think today you can't really look at Get Carter without seeing his name attached to it. So back in the day, it was sort of glossed over that, like, Ted's influence was sort of glossed over as the vibe I'm getting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as a writer, I mean, I don't know, I've never had anything adapted, but it kind of runs away from you, doesn't it? It's not your project.
Yeah.
And I think for him, he never reached those heights again. And so I think as he got older, certainly there was an element of, look, they took my story, and I don't get the credit for it. And that's what his family felt when I spoke to them.
Interesting.
Very much the case that, they just felt that he wasn't given due credit, and that credit on the film is really a little bit of a kind of unjust epitaph, if you like.
Because I suppose if he was credited as writing the film, he would have been given more money than what he got. So that's quite classic in Hollywood, isn't it? Though,
yeah.
in
totally.
filming in general.
I was just going to say, it's not a new story, is it? That writers feel edged out when their books are opted for film treatment. There are loads of examples of it, and loads of examples of, as you say, Nick, the sense that it's being taken away from you and turned into something else, and it stops being yours. I think there's enough examples of that to know that's a common thing in film. Not to say it's a right thing, because it clearly isn't, because the film wouldn't exist without the book. And I'm a firm believer that whilst I don't accept that films necessarily have to be slavish to the book, but I think you have to be faithful if you're going to bother doing it at all. Otherwise you might as well just write your own script from scratch. I think an adaptation's got to at least touch base with the source material as often as it can, so that source material is recognizable to anyone that does happen to know the book. Otherwise, I don't see the point in doing it. But equally, it's a fine line for me, because equally there are many adaptations of books that I love that are so slavish to the original that they become boring because a book isn't a film or a radio play or whatever it is. In terms of adaptations, I do think this one works quite well, but it's a shame that Lewis didn't get his just desserts from it, in his due credit. It's a shame, but again, as so often happens with, certainly in comic book history, as time goes on, you get those people who are much more influential than have hitherto been known start to get the recognition that they deserve. People like Bill Finger on Batman, Steve Ditko on Spider-Man. Yeah. We live in more enlightened times, don't we? So is it fair to say is Lewis getting his fair share now? Perhaps, even though it's all a little too late, or
yeah, I mean, I think he is. What I'd say is, I mean, it was one of my aims pretty quickly after starting the project was I want his books back in print. But if I can do that, if I can get people to read his books more widely, then I'll have achieved something. And I think the fact that having published the biography in 2017, the following years, No Exit reprinted Jack Carter's Law. They reprinted Splendor, which is the follow-up. It's not a Carter book, but it's a dark kind of blackmail tale. And they reprinted GBH, which was his final novel, which is, I don't know, it's a landmark in British noir as far as I'm concerned. But the fact that he was being reviewed in the broadsheets and getting the kind of recognition that he was desperate for during his lifetime, because all anybody ever wanted to talk to him about was Carter.
It was interesting with Get Carter because this is it's violent, it's exploitative, it's very in your face with certain things, and it's coming at there's a change in British cinema around this time in the late 60s. A lot of the rules and codes and censorships were being lifted, and you could get away with a lot more. And Get Carter, I think, fully takes advantage of what you can get away with various aspects. But the initial response from critics at the time British critics at the time, is fascinating to me because there's a lot of them that didn't quite like it. And I don't know if that was part of your research either, but there seemed to be this sort of, some would say that the plot was criticize the plot for being overly complex or too violent or amorality, all that sort of stuff was sort of, it was almost like Victorian values were coming up when these people were watching this film and reviewing it, even though we're in the the 70s and there's a whole kind of new revolution of sexual revolution, liberating stuff happening. But yeah, I'm curious as to why do you think British critics at the time were so against it? Because American critics were kinder to it. They sort of, some of them didn't like it, but their response in general was much kinder to it than British critics. I'm wondering why were the Brits so stuck up about it?
Brits are stuck up about a lot of stuff. I don't know. I think when we choose to be, we can be very puritanical. I think that's and. Maybe we weren't ready for it. Maybe we weren't quite ready for this when it was released. I don't know. Nick's probably better to talk about that than me, but I wonder if we were just a bit sort of, this is Michael Caine, this is Alfie. We can't handle this, because we can be a bit like that, can't we, the Brits?
I mean, I think if you look at it in a historical context, I mean, I have got a quote here. This was Felix Barker writing in the Evening News, reviewing it, and he condemned the film as revolting, bestial, horribly violent piece of cinema. So he kind of sums up. I went in search. I thought I'll find you a quote that kind of takes it to that limit because I had a feeling we might go this way. But then, like the other biggest commercial release that week in 1971 was Love Story. So you had this kind of two complete like ends of the scale.
It's like the original Barbieheimer, isn't it?
Yeah. I found a quote as well from a review which says it's a doggedly nasty piece of business.
It's great. It's a great quote, isn't it? But my favourite was George Melly, the kind of raconteur and jazz singer, and he likened Get Carter to a bottle of neat gin swallowed before breakfast, and he said it's intoxicating, all right, but it'll do you no good.
You see, that's the sort of quote. That's the sort of quote that would instantly make me want to go and see this film. It'd do quite the opposite to what I suspect its intention was.
Yes. It's like when Ricky Gervais puts bad reviews on the cover of his posters to like get people to like, because it's just like that makes people want to go see it, because it's like, oh, they hated it. Let's go find out why they hated it, and then there you go. That's
the context. The context is that the Richardson's crime family had been arrested in 1966. The Krays had been arrested the year before. The trial was underway. The kind of stuff that was getting into the newspapers of what was coming out about the levels of intimidation and violence and torture I think it had shocked people. I think it had shocked the majority of people, and I think you have to see Get Carter in that context, which is clearly Michael Caine, the producer. That's what he was looking for. He was looking for something that represented that kind of revelation to British society, that actually there were gangsters who were behaving in this way, and I'm not sure that kind of element of the press really wanted to be reminded of that in such a kind of graphic way, and certainly not by someone as kind of close to their hearts as Michael Caine. Their lovable Cockney Errol Flynn had suddenly gone bad.
Right. I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And an extension from that, I think, for me is, I'm not so sure that the British audiences and establishment and whatever you want to say at the time will have quite got their heads around the fact that a villain was the hero. I think we were very much still in a crime drama. The policeman must be the good guy, and the detective character must be the good guy. And emphatically, he's not in this. and it wasn't as if this was a gentle shift. It's a very stark shift into this is a villain, but he's the person we're asking you to follow. And I genuinely think we when I say we, I mean the audiences of the time, British audiences of the time, weren't ready for that. Whereas I think the Americans probably had seen that done a few times. I mean, we've talked in the past about The Glass Key and films like that, where mobsters, gangsters, enforcers are the hero character. But I'm not so sure. I mean, I might be wrong, but I'm not so sure that we'd had a film as major as this where that had happened before.
That's a really good point. It kind of made me think about just that, and that maybe because hard-boiled fiction began in America in the 20s, and British detective fiction in the 20s and 30s and 40s is very golden age. It's very locked room mystery. It's very puzzle based stuff. It's not really looking at, and I argue this in my PhD, it's not really looking at societal problems at the time. They might sort of be there in sprinkles or in the background a little tiny bit, but not really. Whereas American fiction was taking that on from a very early stage. And I think maybe, I wonder if that was why. I wonder if that's part of it. Is it British audiences, you're saying they don't like, they didn't want that presented in front of them.
Yeah, and especially not in the sort of baby face of Michael Caine, perhaps, who, as I say, was Alfie, and he was the cheeky Cockney. He'd shown signs of what he could do, but he was still, I think, seen as a light touch. And even in films like Sapphire, from, I think that is at the late 50s, early 60s, or whatever it is, which is a film with a very strong racial commentary. The social aspect of that is sort of soft soaped and encouraged, perhaps, by the fact that the main character is a Scotland Yard detective. So when you've got a social commentary where your hero is an out and out villain, and the film doesn't shy away from the fact that he's an out and out villain, that will have been quite a knockback, I think, to a lot of audiences.
I think that was part of my with the book. That's really what I wanted to get to, that to sort of make that case that it starts with Get Carter. And whilst you can go back and look at Brighton Rock as another example of an incredible film where the hero or the anti-hero is a nasty little piece of work. And you can look at other, they Live by Night is another one. The Long Memory, but all of these films, they're kind of little islands of noir that cropped up. But I think it's only with Get Carter that you get that kind of anti-hero villain noir tradition
and
actually establishing itself.
I agree. And in Brighton Rock, you've got the Ada character, haven't you? Who's the sort of the image of the sort of reverse of the Richard Attenborough character. Whereas here, you're being asked to take Carter as your detective. Essentially, he is your sleuth. There's no sort of official policeman dogging his footsteps or anything like that, or a Watson character, for want of a better phrase. He is your sleuth. He is your private eye in this film. And that's a lot to swallow, I think.
It is, but also in addition to that, there's nothing redeemable about him. Like he's a nasty guy from beginning to end. And I was just thinking about the opening of the movie. We can get into the story now a bit more, because like the opening of the movie is interesting because it's Kane with all of his London gangster buddies, and they're looking at pornographic images, look like blackmail images. They've been getting dirt on various people, and it's interesting because they're all looking at it and they're like, oh, Carter, we don't want you to go. He's like, well, I gotta go. While they're looking at these graphic images, which obviously comes back later in the story as a very big thing. So it's like in this moment you have Carter, who's fine to be blackmailing people with pornographic images and ready to go, do some unlawful justice up north. But at the same time, when he is confronted with someone close to him being blackmailed or being used in a pornographic way, it changes everything. So you really get this, there's a real conflict, and I can see why certain people might find it difficult, because you look at, a lot of modern day anti-heroes, like people like characters like Deadpool or whatever, because that's a big movie that's out in the moment. They sort of, they gloss them up enough to make you sort of want to be on their side, whereas there's very, very little to be on his side other than you're just like, I want to know what happened to his brother, and I want to see this gangster guy get his revenge for the murder of his, possible murder of his brother. So I found that quite interesting. That I think that is probably part of the problem is where are the heroics? I mean, Nick, what's your take on Carter? Do you see him as redeemable in any way? Or
no, I don't think there's a single redeemable character in the story. I think they're all flawed to that extent, and that's what makes it a noir film for me. That it doesn't shy away from the fact that these people are lost. They're lost at the beginning of the film. They're lost at the end of the film. It's just more of them are dead at the end of the film than at the beginning. But I think that whole idea of the story that begins in that place. I mean, there is one school of thought that says that Jack Carter at the beginning, looking out of the window, is already dead, and that actually what you're seeing is this avenging angel. Mike spoke about that and didn't deny it, but then didn't. That's not what he was shooting. But I think the fact that his original touchstone for the adaptation was Double Indemnity. That was where he kind of started, and with that idea of it being told in flashback, which he then ditched. So you've kind of got the bones of that. I think are still partly there, but that idea of a kind of, they don't want him to go, he's going to go, come what may, and obviously as the story opens out, we find out the significance of that presumably, the Fletcher brothers, his gangster bosses already know.
Yes. And the other thing it kind of adds to his, like, another aspect, like very early on, the film just really sets it up that there's nothing you can do to get behind this guy. But he's on the train ride up, and it's a very slow train. I found the whole opening is actually is quite slow. It's interesting, but it's a very slow opening for me. but he's on the train right up. He's doing drugs. He's like he's looking at porno. He's blackmailing people, and he's doing drugs on the way up. And you're just like, okay, all right, this guy's a nasty guy. Whereas even we think about movies like The Glass Key, Ned Beaumont, he's charming, he's fun. Like they try and make him redeemable in some way, and but I like the fact that Carter in this movie has none of that. It is just full on brutal, nasty gangster dude. And you see the influence of Carter on a lot of people. You see it in Guy Ritchie, you see it in Quentin Tarantino movies. These guys have referenced Get Carter quite a bit, because how many of their movies are just full of people that are not dissimilar to Carter, just vile individuals, but you're interested in their journey.
Yeah, well, The Sopranos is another one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anything that's sort of where the main characters are gangsters or criminals owes something to the legacy of this film and the book, But I like the fact that he's not redeemable. I also like the fact that is he not reading Farewell My Lovely on the train up as well?
He is.
Which is a nice little, that tells you exactly where you, without saying a word, that tells you what sort of world you're in, where everything's going to be seedy and corrupt, and the fact he's reading it means he presumably means he's enjoying it, because he's quite a way through it. So, and it also tells you that he is going to be your private eye in this, in inverted commas. I know what you mean about it being slow, Luke, but I think that's to its benefit. I really do. I think it's great. Because once it starts, it doesn't let up. There is absolutely no come down from this in the whole 2 hours, whatever it is, apart from that opening. So I think you need that to. It's like the start of a roller coaster. It slowly builds up and then you're straight off. But the scene immediately after that, when he goes to that pub, is one of my favourites of all. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier about this being a slice of social history, because that's what pubs were like in that day and age. I remember pubs being like that. I remember trains being like that. And it's a perfect piece of social commentary. And I think, am I right in saying, Nick, that they weren't extras? They were sort of real.
Yeah, they were local
hunters.
people. Yeah. Especially
when he orders his drink in a long glass, it sort of sparks a craze for it, and bartenders got sick of serving drinks in long glasses. That's the story anyway. I don't know how true it is, but that's the story. Because that would be something so different, wouldn't it? In a Newcastle city centre pub, that shows his sort of London ways, doesn't it? But no one's going to mess with him.
And I think that's a really interesting scene in a lot of ways, because, as you say, we see him interacting with his bosses to begin with. We see him in his own space on the train reading, and incidentally, there is the guy who. Are we doing spoilers or not?
Oh yeah, spoiler.
Okay.
Yeah. Spoiler.
All right. Well, the fact that his eventual assassin is on the train in the same carriage with him on the way up to Newcastle, which again is just an incredible touch. But then his first interaction with kind of the real world in that pub is to click his fingers at a barman and demand a pint in a thin glass.
Yeah.
And it's like, he really doesn't care what anybody thinks of him. He absolutely doesn't care what anybody thinks of him. And that's quite an empowering thing for a working class bloke to walk into a place like that and not give a damn.
As an introduction to a character, I think that opening sort of 5 minutes or so, because he doesn't really say very much, does he? In fact, does he say anything? Until he says in a long glass, he orders his drink in a long glass. I'm not sure he says anything. But you know exactly what he is and who he is. And, that's cinema, isn't it? That's what cinema's all about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really well judged, because what happens next is the phone rings on the bar. And again, you've got that kind of classic, doesn't happen anymore. But, there is the pub has a phone on the bar. And the barman shouts out, "Is there a Mr. Carter in the room?"
Yeah.
And it's like, I've just got chills even saying it. It's kind of what that does, and he kind of looks up and I think he's smoking gitane cigarettes. So he's smoking French cigarettes. He's in a Newcastle pub. He's ordered a pint in a thin glass. He's come up from London, and somebody wants to talk to him. I mean, what an entrance to this world.
One of the things that because I do have a few quibbles along the way with the story. There's a lot of really great moments, but I remember reading some of the earlier reviews after I watched the film that sort of echoed a little bit of the thoughts that I had, and that was it is quite complex, the plot. Is it overly complex? Maybe. I do feel that maybe there are one too many characters in the movie. When you're watching it, you do sort of have to kind of keep tally as to, because you are a lot of people are sort of thrown at you in this story, and I'm not sure if the film juggled them all to the best of their ability. One character I sort of feel gets put to the wayside was Doreen. I was very interested in Doreen at the beginning, and she has just 2 or 3 scenes, and they're interesting scenes, but that's a character that never comes to life, and I don't know if it's because there's so many people and we're spending so much time with the gangster element and him going after those different individuals that, he spends a lot of time with the landlady. She has more of a role than Doreen, who is possibly Carter's daughter, having, it's interesting. He's up in Newcastle to avenge that murder of his brother, while also being responsible, having cheated on, his brother's wife and being the possible father of their kid, and him not, does the brother know? Does the brother not know? So I felt like they set Doreen up to be really interesting, but because there were so many different people, I mean, like the scene in Kinnear's, is it Kinnear or the gangster's house, where Carter slips into the gangster house in a very fun little, James Bond-esque way. Like that scene during the cards, I'm like, I don't actually know who is meant to be important in that scene. Is everybody important? Is the girl important? Is, which person should I be focusing on? Which, as you say, lends itself to that sort of documentary style of like, we're just watching this room and watching things happen. But I felt, what, from a story perspective, there was an element of me saying, I wish I had a little bit more focus as to who I really need to be paying attention to in this scene. I don't know if you guys felt that way at all, or if it's just me. It's fine if it's just me.
I don't have that sense. No, I'm not sure. I think it is overly complex in terms of plot, and just in that scene. I mean, I'm more simple-minded than you, Luke. I don't know, but I just think my attention's on Carter. I'm going to follow Carter, and if he says somebody's important, I will go along with him. So I'm in that car plane scene. I just wait to find out who's important, because I know that I will be told who's important. I sort of already know that Ian Hendry's character, Eric, is important because he's already made contact with him.
Yeah.
And he then turns up at that house. So I know to keep my eye on him. As for the rest of them, I'm quite happy to just sit and wait for Carter to do what he's got to do, to be quite honest. And I don't think it's I don't think it's overly complex. I mean, it's, films like this have got to have a complexity to a certain extent in terms of plot, because you've got to find things out. There's got to be false leads. There's got to be betrayal and all the rest of it. And I don't think it's any more complex than, a dozen other film noirs that have complex plots, like Out of the Past. I don't think it's any more complex than Out of the Past. It's certainly not more complex than The Big Sleep, is it? Don't know. But no, so no, I disagree on that. I disagree on the complexity of the plot being over complex, and I don't really worry too much about not knowing who people are, because I'm willing to follow Carter and find out what he's got to find out with him. Nick, what's your?
Yeah, no, I think that's quite interesting. I mean, it does, I guess, there is that idea of noir stories allowing for a little bit more complexity. Whether or not it oversteps, I don't. I mean, it doesn't for me. But then it's hard to remember a time where I didn't know this film really, really well. So I'm maybe not the best person to judge. But what I like about that, Carter makes a mistake. He makes lots of mistakes, as he should. But I like the fact that when he invades Cliff Brumby's house, he realizes he's been set up and just says, "I made a mistake."
Yes.
And I like that we allow for that. He doesn't know who's who. We're finding out as he finds out, oh, you're not who I thought you were, or who I was led to believe you were. And it's that idea that, well, he's probably, if en route he happens to kill a few people who didn't deserve it, well, that's just par for the course. That's just going to happen. And it's that idea of him as a kind of an avenging angel. There will be a few bodies along the way, a bit of collateral damage, but you're never quite sure who it is. Who's going to cop it next.
And there's bound to be collateral damage, given who Carter is, isn't there? He's not going to, he's not going to just sort of question somebody nicely and then pat him on the back and buy him a drink and say thanks very much, is he? If he needs to, he's going to do him over or kill him.
I mean, if there are sort of one too many villains, I mean, I suspect if I was writing it or something similar, you've got Albert Swift, you've got Thorpe, you've got Brumby, you've got all of these people. You would probably roll a couple of those into one character, for example.
Yeah, possibly.
But I guess that's residual from the novel, where all of these people have a very specific role in who Jack Carter becomes. So in the novel, Albert Swift is a moneylender in the steelworks in Scunthorpe, and he's the person who Jack Carter is kind of apprenticed to as a teenager. So there's history there between them, and obviously that's not there in the film any more than the relationship between Jack and Frank Carter is in the film. And the fact that the reason Jack left his home was because he'd made love to Frank's wife the night before their wedding, and she'd left and was pregnant.
Yeah.
But with Jack's daughter, who is Doreen. And so that's the guilt that drives him as much as revenge. That's perhaps not quite as much of a driving force in the film, but that's what drives him in the novel, is this guilt at what he's done.
And that's what I really wish was in the film. That's what you've mentioned there are all the things that I'm like, and that's what I think it needed a little bit more. We needed a little bit more Doreen. Like, there's all these different people, but all the people that I'm interested in, like, what's the relationship with the brother? What's the relationship with Doreen? What's the relationship with his brother's ex-wife? Like, what are those things? And I think that was one of the aspects that I was like, well, we're meeting all these different interesting gangsters, but they're just gangsters doing gangster stuff. It's all good. Great scene, great writing, looks great. But I'm just like, what is that motive? What is Carter's motive other than just my brother has died, I need to find out why? And when you get those lines of like, well, we're not sure if Doreen is his daughter or not, then you're like, okay, is the movie going to explore that? And it doesn't. So it's those little bits of sort of, as I watch, I'm like, I just wish they took a little bit more time with that. That it's probably my big criticism with the movie is that aspect. Is I wanted to get to know Carter a little bit better than I think what the movie allows for. And I suppose it's one of those things where it's, if you've read the book, then but you have to you also have to assume that people watching the film might not have read the book. So you can't, like, I know a lot of films today will do that if they're an adaptation. The Harry Potter franchise is a massive, does this quite a lot, where if you've read the book, then you get the certain things. If you've not, you're like, well, why is this happening? And why is this important? And I think there is an aspect of that with Get Carter. I that's my big criticism with it. I have to say.
But I don't think it detracts from what it is as a film. I think it's perfectly like paced, and the story, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of direct and it's clear. It's just, as you say, some of that underlying stuff might have helped, but
Yeah, and I think you could make a case for both sides, really. I think you can make a case for you need to know why Jack's doing it. But I think you can also make a case for, well, he's doing it because it was his brother and they're estranged and he wants to make up for it. When it's too, now it's too late. He wants to do what he can. Now it's too late. And what more motivation do I need? I think you, if you sat a cinema audience down to watch this now and split it 50, I think you get a split 50-50 of some people who'd be on your side, Luke, and some who'd be on like my side, as it were. That I know all I need to know in the context of these 2 hours, in the frame of these 2 hours. I know all I need to know about who's doing what to whom. If there's more layers to the book, then fair enough. There often is, and I can walk away from the cinema quite happy without knowing them. So I think the skill of the screenplay is that it doesn't. To somebody like us, we can say, well, I want more of that motivation. I want to know more about Doreen and all the rest of it. But to a punter, a day-to-day punter, you don't lose out on anything, and you still come away with a satisfying piece of cinema. It's there's a lot of films like that, isn't there? It doesn't leave a gap. It doesn't leave a gaping plot hole or a character hole necessarily, unless you go looking for it. That would be my take on that.
Yeah, no, I never felt that the film was that there were plot holes. I just felt like it carries you along, and as you were saying, Nick and Matt, like it carries you along. And you understand enough. You understand enough to go with it. And it is thrilling. I mean, once he starts poking the hornet's nest, and the gangsters are coming to his house, and he's chasing them down the streets, and all that kind of, like, once all that stuff starts kicking off, you are compelled to just follow that action and follow that to its conclusion, which was that in of itself was great fun and thrilling. And the scene where he goes to Brumby's house and he's got it wrong. That was, and then he goes back to his flat, and the guy, the landlady's been, roughed up, and the guy he was holding hostage has pissed off, and then his friend has been brutally beaten up, by his mistake. So all that kind of stuff, and when he tries to, pay his friend and give his friend money for the trouble of getting beat up, and he's like, I don't want your stinking money. My girlfriend was coming to town. Well, what? There's no point now, because he's too beaten up to have fun. To
which
all that
Carter's
stuff
reply,
is great.
To which Carter's reply is, get yourself some karate lessons.
Yeah,
and that's why we like him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's how he does it, and that's how he's irredeemable.
Yes.
He's a terrible, terrible man.
Don't trust
funny.
But somehow you do still quite like him.
Yeah.
Yes. There is certainly despite being reprehensible, there is a certain charm to him, and I think that is, in the hands of a different actor, I don't know if it would come across as well. But Michael Caine is a incredible actor who could balance that. I'm going to cut your throat, but here's a line like, "Don't trust boys," and you're like, oh, he cares about her, so he does care about certain things. He said this says it to Doreen, "Don't trust boys," and you're like, okay, so there is a sliver of humanity somewhere in that beast.
And I think it is down to Kane. Now, Nick, am I right in thinking that Ian Hendry was originally the bloke who plays Eric?
Yeah, Ian Hendry was Mike Hodges' preferred choice. But Michael Klinger had already spoken to Michael Caine, and quite clearly Kane's cachet at that point meant that there was kind of no question that he'd take the lead. And I think, speak to different people and they'll tell you different things. But I think that did kind of breed some animosity between Kane and Hendry on set. And I mean,
Hendry was jealous, I think.
Yeah, he was a big, and he was also, I think, quite a heavy drinker at that time.
Yeah, he was a full blown alcoholic by then, I think.
Yeah, and so you've got that scene at the racetrack with that classic, eyes like piss holes in the snow.
Yeah,
that's a great line. My God.
And you kind of, there's a real sort of, there's a bit of acid in there, isn't there? It's a little.
There is a bit of acid in there. I just wonder what sort of film it would be, and if we'd be talking about it if Hendry had been in the lead. And
I don't know if we would be talking about it.
No, I don't. I think this film owes a lot to Michael Caine.
Well, I mean, I think there is an interesting parallel, and it's between this film and Villain with Richard Burton, which was released literally within a couple of months. Both of which I suspect had their roots in. Well, they both had their roots in a novel that was written around that time, but the way that two quite, not similar stories, but they're certainly similar source material and similar worlds that they're creating, how different they are. And they're different because Kane works as Carter. Richard Burton really doesn't work as Vic Dakin, not for me. I mean, it's a great film, but it doesn't have that kind of central performance that just drives it through.
Yeah, I mean, part of the film's magic for me is the fact that it is Michael Caine, and what he brings to it, because he does have that charm. I'm not sure the line "get yourself karate lessons" would be quite as golden as it is coming out of Ian Hendry's mouth somehow, and I'm not sure the famous thing about you're in bad shape with me, it's a full-time job will be the same. There are just certain, maybe it's because we know it's Kane, it's Kane all the way, but there are certain things you can imagine other actors doing with certain lines. You can imagine how they would deliver those lines. I don't think you'd get the laugh that you get if Hendry delivered them, and I don't think you would sympathise, if that's the right word, with Carter the way you do if Ian Hendry had played it. Personally, I think there's a lot to be said for the casting of Michael Caine in this film. Yeah,
you need someone like Kane, and in my head, what I'm thinking is I'm thinking like Cary Grant. Like Cary Grant, you need that, and they're like on the same level where pretty much anything you put them in, they're going to shine, and will probably be able to nail the subtleties of various things. I'm not saying Cary Grant is gonna play a good Carter, but like they have that sort of ability to pull you in. They're that level of movie star that you are pulled in by their performance and in their subtleties and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's what makes Get Carter, one of the reasons it makes Get Carter such a great film, outside of like the visual style of everything, is Kane is such an interesting guy. And I'm right if I'm right in thinking he pulled inspiration from, did he like, what's his background with gangsters? Did he like, I heard somewhere where he was like, I don't know, like pulled inspiration from gangsters that he knew or was aware of. Nick, do you know what his background is with London?
Yeah, I mean, he said that he was quoted as saying that Jack Carter is the ghost of Michael Caine. He's who he might have been had he not, struck lucky when he struck lucky, because he grew up in just off the Old Kent Road, and crime was an option.
Yeah,
is that
put that into context for the listeners, because they're not going to know what the Old Kent Road is.
So
going
the Old Kent Road is a kind of working class part of southeast London, which is quite, at that point where he was when he was born, was quite poor.
Yeah.
His dad was a fish porter at Billingsgate Fish Market, so it was a very much a kind of working class background, and some of the options around there, that's the turf of the Richardson family in South London, and those pubs that he would have drunk in growing up, or the pubs that the Richardson gangs would have drunk in. So it's not difficult to be in and around those people. The same to a certain extent for Ted Lewis, who was working in Soho in the 60s, where he was rubbing shoulders. And it was that period where you could just as easily rub shoulders with a film star, a peer of the realm, or a gangster, and they would be that kind of coming together of different strata and classes.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of kind of more interaction, and that was Kane's take on it, was that that's who he might have been had things not worked out. And he did know people. He did know people in the underworld. And there was one guy in particular who went back to him afterwards and said that, I didn't believe you as a gangster. You didn't have a family. You weren't good to your family. Because there's that idea that, you looked after your family first. And clearly, like, Jack Carter, as you said, with Doreen, he should have looked her, he should have seen her right. That was his job, to see her right as a family man, and he didn't. And so that kind of played into it as well. But there were, I spoke to Tony Klinger, Michael Klinger's son, who was part of the Klinger enterprise at that time when they were making the film. And the production itself was part of an MGM deal when they closed Borehamwood Studios, and they were expecting potential union trouble. And so James Aubrey, who'd just been made head of MGM in the States, said, well, to kind of placate the unions, well, we give you some money to make 4 films. But he kind of wanted to retain an influence over them. And Tony Klinger said that when they went, just before shooting started, they went over to the States to meet with Aubrey. And he spent the evening proposing alternative actors to play characters. So he wanted Telly Savalas to play Cliff Brumby, the Mosley character. Yeah, he actually proposed John Osborne's character Kinnear be played by Edward G. Robinson. And apparently this was it. This was where he didn't get his way. It was really hacked off. Was he wanted Steve McQueen to play Jack Carter.
Oh,
wow.
So in an alternative universe, had Klinger and Hodges not stood up to James Aubrey, that might have been the cast of the film. So,
with the best will in the world to all those people, I don't think we'd be talking about it today if that.
Well, I think we might be talking about it, but for very different reasons.
In a vastly different way.
but I guess you kind of look at it, and you look at who Savalas was at that time, and I guess he'd just done The Dirty Dozen. But then you look at McQueen had just done Bullet, and so you can see a certain logic in it, but I think it's a stateside logic rather than a kind of
and we know what the States did with Get Carter, don't we? So let's not talk.
Episode for another day. It's something that's interesting about Get Carter as well is the women in the movie have it very tough. None of them have a good time in this, and there's so many different interesting scenes involving ladies in this film. One is Carter having phone sex in front of the landlady, and she's rocking back and forth in a rocking chair. The other girl's getting off back home. And there's a lot of gratuity in this movie. A lot of gratuitous nudity, which I can imagine probably put people off, because in the States, this was rated X at the time when it came out, and then was later rated R. And that, it's interesting because, Carter is, in these scenes, he sort of has this command. The landlady is rocking back and forth, getting flustered. He's telling this other girl over the phone what to do, and she's doing it while he's just sitting there fully clothed and not having to do anything other than just command power over some of these ladies. There's so I don't know, I feel like there's a very interesting treatment of women in the movie that I suppose probably didn't make British audiences feel very happy because it's like it's quite sleazy, I would say. I don't know.
I asked Geraldine Moffat about that.
Okay.
I spoke to her, and that was one of my questions. Was how did it feel? And she said, it in a way. Well, when they shot the pseudo porn film, she'd drunk a bottle of sherry that day to get herself through it, but she kind of was. She said Mike was incredibly sensitive about it and was kind of got them through it in a very supportive way. So their actual experience of making it wasn't necessarily as kind of exploitative as that. So that's one thing to say. And she did say that they didn't really think of it in those terms. They didn't really think of it as they knew it was kind of quite a misogynist perspective in certain ways, but it didn't feel like that to them making it. They were looked after in that sense. But you're right, and to a certain extent you have to think of Michael Klinger's background there, in that he'd come from owning bars in Soho. He turned the Gargoyle Club into the Nell Gwyn Review. He opened a Continental cinema in Soho that was showing European porn films. He was making porn films. The girls who were strippers at the Nell Gwyn Review were kind of doubling up as actors in his films, and that was his where he came from. So I think a lot of that stuff he would have certainly had an influence over, if not directly kind of encouraging Mike to go that way, to open up that world, because again, nobody had done that up until that point. He's like, no, this is what it's like. This is what these people are like. Yeah.
And I should caveat this is saying I'm not saying that this is a problem with the filmmakers. I'm just saying that the film really in its portrayal really shows that sleazy side of that period. It's one of those things that doesn't shy away. Because I listened to an interview with Petra Markham, the lady who plays Doreen, and she said the same thing. Bottle of sherry before the filming of that scene, but also they felt looked after and safe during that, which is a good thing to hear from the women who were involved in this stuff, because it's when you're watching it as a film, you're watching those scenes, and it is a very uncomfortable at times watch, because it's so exploitative, and it's you feel the danger. I mean, the characters, Geraldine Moffat, who plays Glenda. I mean, at one point, once Michael Caine finds out she was involved with the porno, he puts her in a trunk of the boot of a car, and the next time we see that car, it gets pushed into the water, and she's not been let out. So you're like, okay, she has just been, murdered. Well, a car smashes into the back of it, which probably did her some damage, and then that car pushes her into the water, and no one knows she's in that car, and so she's just gone. So it is, I mean, it's an incredibly brutal film on multiple perspectives. But should we talk about the brutal ending?
When we screened Get Carter in 2013, we didn't watch the whole film. Mike didn't want to watch the whole film, understandably. So that we went.
Why?
I think he had seen it enough times. He didn't want to. But we got back to where we were screening the film. We went out for something to eat. We got back at the end, towards the end, and particularly that scene on the beach at Blackhall. He was standing there kind of looking at it, and he just kind of leaned over and said, it's like watching somebody else's film. And I think he was struck by how it looked. And I think, for as brutal as that ending is, I think it looks great.
Oh, it's terrific.
Yeah, it does look great.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like, as a piece of filmmaking, that brutality, that Eric's death, what leads up to it, is one thing. But I think the way it's staged and the way it looks is again, part of the reason why we're still talking about this film 50 years on.
I agree. And it's also very matter of fact. You know, it just happens. There's no sort of fanfare. There's no, there's a build up to it, but there's no sort of, signposting as such. It just happens. And you're so wrapped up in forcing Eric to drink the bottle of whiskey, because this is what you did to Frank, sort of thing.
Yeah.
You're so wrapped up in that, and that is quite intense, and that's almost all done in close up and stuff like that. It's so intense. And it's so when the worst has happened, and Carter's got his final revenge, then it starts to go into long shots, and you see him walking along the beach, and then the bullet comes, and then the film's over, and the sense I get of that, the storytelling sense I get of that is, well, he's had his revenge, but that was all very personal. The business that he's wrapped up in is carrying on because you see the assassin walk away, and it's almost a perfect ending, isn't it, for a film like this? It does everything
shocking
it needs
ending.
to do.
It's a shocking ending. I don't know if it's perfect, but it's shocking for sure.
I think it's a perfect ending for it because Jack deserves it, doesn't he?
Does he?
I don't know. Does he? He's going to go back to London and carry on killing people and all the rest of it, isn't he? That's going to happen anyway. But here's this irredeemable character that we talked about who gets something of what he might deserve anyway. It's a fascinating ending. I think it's really striking. And I think any other ending, there are some endings you can say, well, they could have done something different there. But I love the fact that it is just something that happens. It's just another bullet. There's no ceremony to it.
Yeah, the chaos of it where it just happens is something that I like. That it was shocking, and as a shocking ending, this movie is going to give you that for sure. So that is absolutely terrific. I also love the fact that compare this like a James Bond film even at the time or something like that. The chase, you can see how tired they are. Like when they're running up that hill, when Kane is following the guy up the hill with the bottle of whiskey in his pocket and the shotgun and double barrel shotgun in his hand, like you can see just how. And I like that it wasn't a Hollywood chase. I like that it was like you would be exhausted from all of this running, and he just the guy collapsed on the ground and he just forces the whiskey. I love the reality of that, and as again, this goes back to the documentary style. They're not glossing this stuff up. They're making it look and feel very visceral.
And Kane's hair's all over the place, and he's out of breath, and he looks like a man about to collapse, sort of thing.
Yes.
But they shot that sequence in reverse because they thought there's no way we can have Ian Hendry. We can't risk not getting the end of Eric if he like claps out doing the running first. So they shot his killing, and then they shot the chase along the beach. I think there's one other point that I'd make about that ending, which is he's dead. He's laying on the beach, and the music comes in right at the absolute perfect point, and that music is incredible. But again, you talk about people at the top of their game on this film. Roy Budd's score is just phenomenal, and the way it's used and the atmosphere that it creates, absolutely incredible. Something else, I think.
It is a brilliant score. Yeah, it is a brilliant score, and it's not a typical. Again, it's not a Hollywood score, is it?
No, and I think that lends itself to that scene, which is the sound design on that, of the sound quality of that, of the wind coming across that sort of black beach.
Yeah,
and the sort of slag being chucked in the sea.
Yeah.
That from the mines, and it's just extraordinary, isn't it? What a place.
Yeah,
and I love the fact that he's dead on the beach and the water starts coming, and he's going to be taken out to sea, and no one's there to mourn him. No one's going to notice really. His bosses in London will know, but they'll be glad of it, sort of thing. So There's no redemption at all. That's what I really love about this. There's absolutely no redemption for this man.
Get Carter gets the ending right.
The studio didn't like it. So they argued about it. They wanted him to live because they were thinking of sequel potential.
All the more reason to do what they did then. Yes,
and he doesn't die in the book.
It's a kind of, because it's a first person narrative, and it's a kind of fade to black. The ending in the book is the shotgun, that Eric takes the shotgun and uses it, and it explodes in his face.
That's right.
But Carter is wounded. I think he's stabbed at that point.
Final thoughts. Are there any final thoughts on Get Carter that we want to share before we wrap up in a moment?
I mean, I think as a commentary on the state of the nation at that time, as an observation of unchecked corruption at all stratas of society, I think it was slightly overlooked for that because of the brutality and the violence and the sex. And I guess, sort of speaking for Mike Hodges, I think it's a very, very poetic film in a lot of ways. I think there is a poetry in the way it's shot, in the way it's set up. And I think everybody on that is at the top of their game. Klinger at the top of his game as a producer. It's Hodges, flying by the seat of his pants and creating something amazing. Kane was never better, and Lewis maybe wrote a better novel, but I'm not sure. The source material was absolutely bang on for the time, and for creating something unique and era defining.
And it's probably worth mentioning, because we haven't mentioned it yet, but this was Hodges' directorial debut for a cinema, for a feature film. He'd done television and stuff like that, but this was his major motion picture debut, and as a debut, damn,
pretty good, isn't it, for a debut? The only thing, I think everyone is at the top of their game. I certainly think Kane is, and I would agree that he's never been better since. He's come close a couple of times, but he's never been as good as he is here. And this film does for me what all good noir should do, which is challenge you while it unpeels, the sleaze underneath the respectability, because these villains in this all ostensibly they're all rich businessmen. Brian Mosley's character particularly, underneath are all as rotten as they come. And I think that's what noir is all about, isn't it? It's about the seedy underbelly. For a British film to get noir so right, I think is a tribute to how good this film is.
Now, Nick, all of our films, we rate them out of 1 out of 5 Falcons. So now it's time to rate Get Carter. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, how many Falcons would you give Get Carter?
It's a stone cold 5.
Matt?
Yeah, it is. It's an uncompromising 5.
Okay. I'm going to be controversial here, and I'm going to give it 4.9. I'm giving it 4.9 because I wanted a little bit more understanding of his motives. I wanted a little bit more of Doreen. I wanted a little bit more. I need a little bit more. So I'm shaving. So I'm shaving off a tiny amount, but
just a feather, just a wing feather of the falcon.
Yes, but it's a fantastic movie.
And if you think about it, it wasn't that level, that intensity of crime film wasn't repeated again for another 10 years until The Long Good Friday.
Yeah,
which again, they stand as twin pillars of their eras of coming into the 70s and coming into the 80s, and it's not like The Long Good Friday doesn't happen without Get Carter.
Nick, thanks for joining us.
Yes, thanks, Nick.
Everyone, if you want to learn a little bit more about Get Carter, go purchase Nick's book, Getting Carter. You won't be disappointed. We've nailed Get Carter.
Well, that wraps up our investigation. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another case. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, and be sure to take care walking down those mean streets.